Dust on my shoes is my constant companion. In El Paso, it had almost become an affinity for me. I knelt on my knees, smoothing the blueprints on the ground, the sun beating down mercilessly on my back. Chamisal Park had long been in need of a makeover, and my project was going to breathe new life into it. Margot, are the sakura trees sure to grow here? Diana, my assistant, asked, pointing to the marks on the plan. If we create the right climate, it will, I said, wiping the sweat from my forehead. The Japanese garden in San Antonio has sakura trees, and they have a climate no better than ours. Diana hummed doubtfully, but I was used to my ideas being met with disbelief at first. 8 years of living on my own had taught me to believe in myself, even when no one else did. The phone in my pocket vibrated, and I reluctantly pulled it out. It was an unfamiliar number. I don't usually answer one of these, but something compelled me to take the call. Margot Aldridge? A deep masculine voice sounded in the receiver. Yes, it's me. My name is Phineas Crumpton. I'm your grandfather's attorney, Tobias Winslow. I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Winslow passed away last night. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was beginning to spread. I sank to the nearest bench, unable to feel my own feet. What? How did this happen? Heart attack. He went out in his sleep, the lawyer said with genuine sympathy. Mr. Winslow left detailed instructions about his will. The reading will take place in 3 days at his home in Fort Worth. Your presence is required. Yeah, understand, I mumbled, though I didn't understand anything. Grandfather had never talked about the will. The last time I'd seen him had been 2 months ago, when he'd come to El Paso on the pretext of a business meeting. We had lunch at a small Mexican restaurant on the outskirts of town. He looked tired but full of life, as always. The whole family will be present, the lawyer continued. I understand that your relationship with your parents is complicated, but Mr. Winslow really wanted you to come. At the mention of my parents, my heart squeezed. I hadn't seen them in 8 years, not since the day I turned 24. When I hung up the phone, Diana came over to me. Is everything okay? You're white as chalk. My grandfather died, I said, and only then did the tears come out of my eyes. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment with a glass of wine, looking out at the lights of the city. My grandfather's picture was next to me. He was on a yacht, laughing. The wind was ruffling his gray hair. He was always my favorite person to photograph. He knew how to live in the moment. Memories came like a tidal wave. I'm 6, and Grandpa is teaching me how to recognize the plants in his garden. You see, Margot, every flower is unique, just like you. Don't ever let anyone force you to be like any other flower. I'm 12, and my parents have once again canceled a promised trip because of work. Grandpa takes me to his estate for the weekend. We go horseback riding, and he tells me about the stars. I'm 18, and I want to study landscape design, not law, as my parents insist. You're throwing your life away, my father yells. After all we've done for you, my mother echoes. Grandpa is the only one who supports my choice, secretly paying for my courses. Finally, the day of my 24th birthday. I graduated from college, found a job not at a prestigious firm, but at a small landscape design studio. My parents gave me an ultimatum. Either I come to my senses and go get a real education, or I have nothing to do in their house. I chose freedom. From then on, my grandfather became my only family. We met secretly, usually in other cities. He always brought me books on botany and design and took an interest in my projects. When I was particularly struggling financially, I would find envelopes of cash in the mailbox. He never admitted it was from him, but I knew. And now he's gone. And I got to meet my parents, who probably hadn't changed over the years. I took a sip of wine and opened my laptop to book a flight to Fort Worth. My fingers trembled. Would it even be worth the trip? What if it just became another humiliation? Vivian and Garrett Aldridge were masterful at making me feel worthless. My grandfather might have left me a legacy, but with my parents around, any joy would be torture. I closed my laptop without buying a ticket, then looked at the photo of my grandfather. His eyes seemed to say, "Don't run away, Margot. You're stronger than you think." I woke up the next morning with a headache and a sense of loss that never seemed to leave me. At work, I asked for time off, explaining the situation. My boss, Eloise Pym, was sympathetic to my request. Sure, Margot, take as much as you need. The park project isn't going anywhere. At home, I finally forced myself to buy a ticket. Not for my parents, but for my grandfather. He'd want me there. Maybe this would be my last chance to feel connected to him. I started to pack when the phone rang. My mother's number. She hadn't called once in 8 years. I hesitated, staring at the screen, then answered it. Margot. Her voice sounded as cold and calculating as I remembered. I assume you've been informed of Grandpa's death. Yes, Mom, I already bought a ticket. Good. She paused. Your father and I will be glad to see you after all these years. That's a lie. They'd only be happy if Grandpa left me something of value that they could take possession of. Me too, I lied back. Are you staying at Grandpa's house? There are plenty of rooms, and my father and I have already arrived. Of course they were there first. They're probably already dividing up the property in their heads. I'll get a hotel room. Don't be silly, her tone hardened. Family should stick together at times like this. Family. How conveniently she remembered that concept. I'll think about it, I answered, and hung up before she could push harder. In the evening, I received a call from Phineas Crumpton. Miss Aldridge, he began, your grandfather asked me to tell you that he has a room ready for you at his house. He has also left an envelope which I am to hand to you personally on your arrival, before the formal reading of the will. What's in the envelope? I asked. I don't know the contents, but your grandfather was very insistent that you receive it as early as possible. My grandfather's mystery intrigued me even after his death. All night I couldn't sleep, wondering what awaited me in Fort Worth. In the morning, looking at my reflection in the mirror, I saw shadows under my eyes and determination in my gaze. 8 years ago, I had fled a toxic relationship, choosing freedom. Now I was coming back, not a broken prodigal daughter, but a woman who had built a life of her own. At the airport, waiting to board, I flipped through pictures of my grandfather on my phone. At our last dinner, he had looked pensive when he thought I wasn't looking at him. I understood now. He probably knew about his heart condition even then, but didn't want to alarm me. I'm coming, Grandpa, I whispered, looking at his smiling face on the screen. I hope you've prepared something to help me get through my encounter with them. Boarding was announced, and I headed for the gate, feeling each step bringing me closer to the past I'd been running from for so long. The cab stopped at a wrought iron gate, beyond which stretched Grandpa's garden. Even in September it looked well tended, a credit to Baxter, the permanent gardener. Grandfather had always said that true beauty required care, even when it was fading. I paid the cabbie and grasped the cold metal handle of the gate. For a moment, fear gripped me. Going in there meant confronting the past. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the heavy gate open. I followed the gravel path toward the 2-story sandstone house. Grandpa adored this house. You see, Margot, it has character, he'd say, stroking the rough walls. Now I was to enter it not as a guest, but as, who? An heiress? An uninvited relative? Phineas Crumpton, a tall man with a neat gray beard and attentive eyes, met me on the porch. Ms. Aldridge, he held out his hand. I'm glad you could come. Your grandfather would have been happy. Thank you, Mr. Crumpton. I shook his dry, warm palm. Are the others here? Yes, everyone's gathered in the parlor. The reading of the will take place in an hour. But first, I'd like to give you something. He pulled an envelope from his inside pocket. As I promised, I took the envelope on which my grandfather had written my name in his handwriting. You can read the contents in the library, Crumpton suggested. There's no one there. I nodded, grateful for the chance to be alone before I met my family. The library was in the east wing of the house, and I made my way there, careful to tread softly on the marble floor. Nothing had changed here. The same heavy curtains, the same leather chairs, the same smell of books and lemonwood polish. I sat down in the chair by the window, Grandpa's favorite spot, and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Dear Margot, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm gone. Don't be too sad. I've lived a long and generally happy life. You're probably wondering why I insisted on your presence at the reading of the will, knowing that it would pit you against your parents. I'm sorry about that, but there's no other way. You'll soon find out that I'm leaving you my entire estate. $17 million, this house, land, and other assets. You deserve it, Margot. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you're strong and honest and real. You remind me of myself when I was young. Your mother, my daughter, unfortunately did not take after me, but rather her mother, who always valued status and money over love and honesty. It's my fault for failing to instill the right values in Vivian, and I've spent my life watching her become more and more like my late wife. They're going to push you, Margot. They will try to make you feel guilty and incompetent. Don't let them. You can handle it. Love, your grandpa Tobias. I clutched the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. 17 million? The whole house? It seemed unreal and unnerving. I'd never aspired to wealth. My job and modest apartment were enough. The library door creaked softly and I shuddered, hurriedly tucking the letter into the envelope. Margot, my darling, there you are. My mother's voice had grown a little lower over the years, but the intonation remained the same, honey, with cold notes. We've been waiting for you. I turned and saw Vivian Aldridge, an elegant woman of 58 with impeccable hair and makeup, even on a day of mourning. Behind her loomed her father, Garrett, with a heavier figure but the same military bearing of an ex-officer. Hello, Mom. I stood up. Hello, Dad. Daughter. My mother stepped forward and hugged me. She smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. You've lost so much weight. And that hair? She touched my short bob. You look interesting. 8 years old, and the first thing she does is criticize my appearance. Margot, my father nodded, making no attempt to hug me. It's a pity we had to meet under these circumstances. And under what circumstances would you like to meet? I wanted to ask, but I remained silent. Let's go into the living room, my mother said. Everyone was gathered there. Aunt Helena was asking about you. Aunt Helena, my father's sister, had never taken much interest in me, but now she must have remembered that her niece existed. I wonder why. The living room was full of people, relatives I barely remembered, and a few faces I didn't recognize at all. They all turned to me as I entered. Margot! Aunt Helena flew up to me first. Darling, how you've grown! What a woman! She had never been married and always looked at her mother with ill-concealed envy. Hello, Aunt Helena, I smiled politely. Uncle Warren. The second husband of my grandfather's sister shook my hand without making eye contact. His daughter from his first marriage, Pearl, nodded from afar. Everyone, please have a seat. Mr. Crumpton's voice interrupted the awkward greetings. It's time to get started. I sat down in the far corner of the couch, but my mother immediately sank down beside me, putting her hand on my knee in a gesture of fake intimacy. So, Crumpton began, putting on his glasses, we are gathered here to announce the last will and testament of Tobias Frederick Winslow, who died on September 25, 2025. He unfolded the papers and began to read out the legal formalities. I watched the faces of those present, tense, mournful, and, in some, frankly impatient. Let's move on to the distribution of the estate, Crumpton finally announced. To his daughter, Vivian Winslow Aldridge, Tobias Winslow leaves a collection of family photographs and personal belongings of his late wife, Eleanor Winslow, as well as the sum of $100,000. I felt my mother tense beside me. $100,000 was a paltry sum compared to my grandfather's fortune. To his son-in-law, Garrett Aldridge, Tobias Winslow leaves a collection of antique weapons and the sum of $50,000. His father's face turned purple. He had always admired his grandfather's gun collection, but he had clearly expected more. Crumpton continued to list small sums and items bequeathed to other relatives and several charitable organizations. Then came a pause. All remaining assets, including the principal account, investment portfolio, real estate in Fort Worth, Santa Fe, and Aspen, and all assets of companies owned by Tobias Winslow, totaling an estimated $17 million, would pass to his granddaughter, Margot Eleanor Aldridge. There was dead silence in the room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. In addition, Crumpton continued, Tobias Winslow appoints me, Phineas Crumpton, as executor of the will and trustee, with the duty of advising Miss Aldridge on all financial matters for the first year after his death, if she so desires. This is some kind of mistake. Her mother's voice rang with tension. Margot doesn't know how to manage such a fortune. She's a landscaper, for God's sake. Darling, my father put his hand on her shoulder but addressed me. Your grandfather was always eccentric. Of course, you've gotten the bulk of the inheritance, and we're happy for you. But you must realize that managing such a fortune requires experience. Mom and I can help you with that. Of course, we'll manage it for you. His smug smile told me that he was already mentally managing Grandpa's millions. I opened my mouth to reply, but Crumpton coughed and turned the page. There's also an addendum to the will I have to read. He adjusted his glasses. I, Tobias Frederick Winslow, being of sound mind and sound judgment, do hereby set forth the following terms of inheritance for my granddaughter Margot Eleanor Aldridge. All of the above property passes to her without any restrictions except the following. First, Vivian Winslow Aldridge and Garrett Aldridge shall have no right to reside on any of Margot Aldridge's inherited property without her express written consent. Second, they shall have no right to manage, control, or influence the financial decisions made by Margot Aldridge with respect to the inherited property. Third, any attempt to contest this will by Vivian and Garrett Aldridge shall automatically disqualify them from receiving the above amounts and items. My parents' faces contorted almost comically. I had never seen a smile so quickly replaced by anger as on my mother's face. This is absurd, she jumped up. My father could not have written such a thing. He was out of his mind. We shall contest this will. Vivian, Crumpton said calmly, think twice before you make such a statement. If you and your husband contest the will, you will lose the funds that are provided for you. It's not about money, the mother said through gritted teeth. It's about justice. Margot ran away from her family, and now she gets everything? I didn't run away. My voice was quiet but firm. You kicked me out because I didn't want to live the life you planned. We gave you a choice, my father intervened. And you made it. Yes, I did, I stood up. And I've never regretted it. There was a long pause. The other relatives looked at each other, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Mr. Crumpton, I turned to the lawyer, is the will final? No further stipulations? Everything has been read, Ms. Aldridge. He nodded. If you have any questions about your duties as heiress, I'm ready to discuss them with you at any convenient time. Then I would like to speak with you tomorrow, I said. Right now, if you don't mind, I'd like to be alone. My mother grabbed my hand. Margot, we need to talk right now. No, Mother. I gently released my hand. We don't. Not today. I headed for the exit, feeling the stares of everyone in the room. Uncle Warren whispered something to Pearl. Aunt Helena shook her head. I knew what they were thinking. A spoiled girl with no appreciation for family, undeservedly given everything. Stepping out into the garden, I took a deep breath of the cool air. My head was spinning with the realization of what had happened. Grandfather hadn't just left me his fortune. He had protected me from my own parents. He knew they would try to control me through money, and he had blocked that path. I sat down on the stone bench under the old oak tree where my grandfather and I often sat discussing my projects. $17 million. The houses, land, companies I knew nothing about. How would I manage it all? Ms. Aldridge? Crumpton's voice interrupted my musings. Pardon the intrusion, but I thought you might need this. He handed me a file folder. It's a summary of the assets and real estate that now belong to you. Your grandfather prepared this especially for you. No legal terminology, just an easy-to-understand explanation of what's where and what's what. Thank you. I took the folder. Mr. Crumpton, how long did you know my grandfather? 30 years. He smiled slightly. I was not only his lawyer, but also his friend. And what did he say about me? That you were the only person he could trust with his legacy, Crumpton answered simply. He was very proud of you, Miss Aldridge. I nodded, unable to say a word because of the lump in my throat. Your room is ready, he continued. Second door on the right on the second floor, as always. My parents? They're staying in the guest house. I have already informed them that, according to the terms of the will, they must leave the estate by tomorrow evening unless you give written permission for them to stay here. I see. I smiled involuntarily, imagining my mother's reaction to those words. Rest well, Miss Aldridge. Crumpton bowed slightly. We have much work to do tomorrow. He left, leaving me alone with a folder full of information about my new status. I opened the first page and saw a picture of the house, signed in my grandfather's handwriting. You're home now, Margot. Make it happy. The morning greeted me with the golden rays of the September sun streaming through the heavy curtains. I lay in my old room, which was still the same as it had been when I'd visited my grandfather as a teenager. The same bed with the wooden headboard, the same bookshelves filled with botany encyclopedias and sketchbooks of gardens. I listened to the sounds of the house. There were muffled voices coming from downstairs, probably servants preparing breakfast. The room smelled of lavender and clean linens. At this moment, in this place familiar from childhood, the reality of yesterday seemed distant and unreal. Reaching for my phone, I found 3 missed calls from my mother and 2 messages. The first one read, "We need to talk. It's urgent." The second, sent at 2 in the morning. "Your grandfather was not in his right mind. You can't just accept this inheritance and cut us out of your life." I put the phone away, not wanting to start the day with that. Instead, I showered, dressed, and went downstairs. Phineas Crumpton was in the dining room, reading the newspaper over a cup of coffee. "Good morning, Miss Aldridge." He folded the paper and stood up. "I hope you slept well." "Relatively." I poured myself coffee from the silver coffee pot. "Have your parents left yet?" "No." Crumpton shook his head. "They're still at the guest house. They have until tonight, like I said." "I see." I sat down at the table across from him. "And the other relatives?" "Most of them left last night. Your Aunt Helena and Cousin Pearl stayed in town at the Hilton Hotel. They asked me to tell you that they'd like to meet you for lunch today." I raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Really? They've been reluctant to keep in touch before." "If I may say so," Crumpton blotted his lips carefully with a napkin. "In situations like this, there are often, shall we say, unexpected attachments." "Are you saying that now all my relatives will suddenly remember how much they love me?" Crumpton allowed himself a slight smile. "Exactly. Your grandfather foresaw such a development. He was a wise man," I sighed, looking at the empty chair at the head of the table where my grandfather usually sat. After breakfast, I decided to look around the house, now my home. It was a strange feeling walking through the rooms, knowing that it all belonged to me now. I looked into my grandfather's study, an austere room with a massive oak desk and shelves filled with documents and books. Touching the leather chair where he spent hours, I felt tears come to my eyes. Only now, in the silence of this room, did I truly feel his absence. Grandpa had been a constant in my life, an anchor to which I could always return. Now he was gone, and I had to cope on my own. I began to look around the study, studying the spines of books and pictures on the walls. One of them showed my grandfather standing with my mother, a young woman of about 16. They were smiling, holding fishing rods. They had once had a normal relationship. What had changed? Pulling out my desk drawers, I found several file folders, old letters, and another envelope with my name on it. This one was sealed differently than the one Crumpton had given me. I opened it carefully and pulled out several sheets of paper in familiar handwriting. "Margot, my dear, I am writing this letter in the hope that you will find it as you explore my study. Knowing your curiosity, I'm sure it will be soon after I leave. I want to tell you something about your mother and my mistakes. Perhaps it will help you understand why things turned out the way they did. Vivian was an only child, and her mother and I spoiled her too much. Eleanor, your grandmother, always believed that status and money were the main indicators of success. She instilled those values in Vivian. I was too busy building my empire to spend enough time with my daughter. When Eleanor died, Vivian was 15. I tried to compensate for her loss by giving her everything she wanted: money, trips, expensive gifts. But I didn't give her the most important thing: an understanding of the value of independence, honest labor, and inner freedom. I only realized my mistakes years later when I saw how she raised you. My daughter was repeating my mistakes, but in a worse way. She and Garrett wanted to completely control your life, suppress your individuality, make you what they thought you should be. I admire your courage, Margot. You were able to break out of that cycle and build your life according to your own rules. I know it wasn't easy. By leaving you my fortune, I hope to give you not only financial freedom, but also the opportunity to right my wrongs. Use these funds wisely. Don't let them change you. And please don't judge your mother too harshly. She is a product of my mistakes, just as you are a product of her mistakes. But you were able to overcome them, and she was not. With eternal love, your grandfather Tobias. I reread the letter several times, trying to make sense of what I had written. Grandpa was admitting his mistakes in raising my mother, but he wasn't asking me to forgive her or fix the relationship. He just wanted me to understand the roots of her behavior. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I hastily wiped away my tears and hid the letter. Come in. Mrs. Bloomfield, the housekeeper who had worked for grandfather for the past 15 years, entered. Miss Margot, your parents want to see you. They're waiting in the parlor. I took a deep breath, gathering my strength. Okay, Esther, tell them I'll be right there. When I entered the living room, my mother was sitting on the couch, her back perfectly straight, and my father was standing by the window with his arms folded behind his back in his usual military posture. Finally, the mother pressed her lips together. We've been waiting for 20 minutes. Good morning to you too. I sat down across from her, not intending to apologize. Margot, my father began. We need to discuss this situation like adults, without emotion. I'm all ears. I crossed my arms over my chest. Your grandfather was obviously not himself when he made the will, my mother said slowly, as if explaining the obvious to a child. He had always been eccentric, but in the last few years it's become more than that. He began to see conspiracies, to suspect everyone around him. Including you? I raised an eyebrow. Yes, including us, she pursed her lips. We consulted a lawyer. We have grounds to contest the will on the grounds of incapacity. If you do that, you'll lose even what he left you, I reminded her. The will clearly states, we know what it says, he interrupted sharply. But think about it, Margot. What do you know about managing that kind of money? You have no experience or education in the field. You'd be easy prey for crooks. Fortunately, my grandfather left me not only the money, but Mr. Crumpton as a consultant. I tried to speak calmly, though I was seething inside. Crumpton, my mother snorted. He's always been a lackey. Do you think he has your best interests at heart? He only cares about his commission. Mom, I looked her straight in the eye. Why can't you just be happy for me? Why is it so hard for you to accept that Grandpa entrusted me with his inheritance? Because it's not fair. Her voice trembled with barely contained anger. I'm his only daughter. I've taken care of him all these years. When? I couldn't help but be sarcastic. Between charity balls and spa treatments? Don't you dare talk to me like that, she jumped up. You ungrateful, self-centered. Vivian, her father put his hand on her shoulder. It won't help. He turned to me. Margot, we're not asking you to give up your inheritance. We're suggesting a compromise. Let's set up a family trust. You'll be the primary beneficiary, but we'll make decisions collectively, as a family. So you can control my every move through money. I shook my head. No, thank you. Grandfather has made his will clear, and I intend to honor it. Then we'll leave you no choice. My mother clenched her fists. We'll sue. And believe me, your reputation as a landscaper will suffer when everyone finds out you manipulated a sick old man for money. Are you serious? I felt the blood rush from my face. You're willing to sully your own father's memory and your daughter's reputation for money? Because of justice. My father straightened even more. Think about our offer, Margot. You have time before we leave. They left the room, leaving me in a daze. Rage, disappointment, bitterness all mixed up inside me. I didn't know what to do next. A few minutes later, Crumpton came into the living room. I saw your parents leave, he said. From the look on their faces, the conversation had not been easy. They're threatening to sue, I rubbed my temples. They want to contest the will on the grounds of Grandpa's incapacity. I expected that. Crumpton nodded calmly. Don't worry, Miss Aldridge. We have everything we need to prove that your grandfather was of sound mind. Medical reports, testimonials from his business associates, videotapes of meetings. Videotapes? I looked at him in surprise. Your grandfather was a prudent man, Crumpton smiled slightly. For the last 2 years, he had documented all important meetings and conversations, anticipating possible complications after his death. Including conversations with my parents? Especially them. Crumpton sat down across from me. Ms. Aldridge, I have to tell you something. Your grandfather changed his will in your favor for a reason. He had good reason not to trust your parents with the management of his estate. He pulled a clipboard out of his briefcase and turned on a video. On the screen, I saw my grandfather's office. He was sitting at his desk, and across from him were my parents. The date in the corner of the screen showed June 6th. Tobias, my mother's voice sounded honeyed. Garrett and I have been thinking about your proposal. Moving in with you is a big step. I'm getting older, Vivian, grandfather replied. I need help managing my affairs, and it would be nice to spend more time with the family. Of course, Dad, mother smiled. We could help you with the finances, relieve you of those worries. What about Margot? Grandfather asked. Mother's face contorted for a moment. What about Margot? She's made her choice. Chose her horticultural career over her family. Crumpton turned off the video. There are other recordings. They show how your parents tried to gain control of your grandfather's finances, alluding to his precarious condition. But the medical examinations he underwent regularly show that he was perfectly healthy mentally. They wanted to declare him incompetent while he was still alive? I was shocked. Not directly, but to set the stage for it, yes. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Mr. Crumpton, why are you showing me this? Why are you helping me? Because your grandfather was not only a client of mine, but a friend, he answered simply. And because I believe his last will must be carried out. He saw in you what he didn't see in his daughter. Honesty and independence of spirit. That's when my phone rang. Aunt Helena's number. Don't answer it, Crumpton advised. First, let's strategize how to deal with your relatives. They'll all be trying to influence you in one way or another. Yes, you're right. I dismissed the challenge. What do you suggest? First, let's go through your grandfather's list of assets. You need to know exactly what you own before you make any decisions. Crumpton and I spent the next few hours going through the documents my grandfather had prepared for me. I learned about real estate, stocks, bonds, private investments, everything I now owned. The information was overwhelming, but Crumpton patiently explained every detail. By late afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. Aunt Helena, Cousin Pearl, even Uncle Warren all wanting to talk to me, offering meetings, lunches, advice. They're like vultures, I muttered, looking at the long list of missed calls. It's common in these situations, Crumpton said philosophically. Money changes people, especially those who don't have it. It was getting dark by the time we finished our work. Crumpton gathered up his papers and rose. Ms. Aldridge, I recommend you don't talk to your relatives yet, especially your parents. Tell them you need time to sort out the inheritance and that all communication must go through me as executor of the will. They won't back down that easily, I sighed. Of course not, Crumpton nodded. But you have an ally now. Don't forget that. When he left, I went back to my grandfather's study and pulled out his letter again. I reread the lines about my mother, about his mistakes, about how he saw the repetition of his parenting blunders in the way they raised me. Now I understood my grandfather's motives better. He wasn't just leaving me money. He was trying to break the cycle, to give me a chance to live a different life. And I was determined not to let him down, even if it meant confronting the whole family. The notice of the lawsuit came 2 weeks after the reading of the will. I was just having breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the quiet morning and the view of the garden, when Esther Bloomfield brought an envelope with an official stamp. A registered letter for you, Miss Margot, she said, and I could tell from her tone that she was guessing at the contents. Tearing open the envelope, I ran my eyes over the legal text. The parents had indeed filed a lawsuit, contesting the will on the grounds of incapacity of the testator at the time the document was made. They claimed that Grandpa suffered from senile dementia and was subject to undue influence from interested parties. My hands shook as I put the papers aside. Despite Crumpton's warnings, I still hoped it wouldn't come to this, that my mother wouldn't sully her father's memory for money, that my father would retain some dignity. The first thing I did was call Crumpton. I got the notice of claim, I said as soon as he answered. Me too, as executor of the will. His voice sounded as calm as ever. Don't panic, Ms. Aldridge. We were prepared for this. I've already contacted the trial lawyers who specialize in such cases. We'll meet with them today at 2 o'clock if that's all right with you. Yes, of course. I took a deep breath. What do I need to prepare? Just come to my office. I took care of the paperwork. After the call, I couldn't sit still. Nervous energy needed an outlet, so I decided to take a walk in the garden. The October sun gently goldened the tops of the trees. The air was filled with the smell of fallen leaves and damp earth. In the far corner of the garden, I noticed an elderly man trimming a hedge. It was Baxter Noon, a gardener who had worked for Grandpa for many years. I had seen him from afar the day I arrived, but had not yet interacted with him in person. Good morning, Mr. Noon. I said hello, stepping closer. He turned around and I saw a tanned, wrinkled face with kind eyes and thick gray eyebrows. Baxter put down the garden shears and bowed slightly. Ms. Aldridge, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Please call me Margot, I smiled. As you wish, Ms. Margot, he smiled back, wrinkles spreading and rays from his eyes. Your grandfather told me a lot about you. Said you understood the soul of plants as well as I did. He was exaggerating. I ran my hand over the perfectly trimmed hedge. You clearly have more experience. But you have talent and love. Baxter nodded toward the old apple tree. Do you remember how you saved that tree? Mr. Tobias told me about it. I smiled, remembering. When I was 15, that apple tree got sick, and the gardener who worked before Baxter wanted to cut it down. But I researched the symptoms, found information in the library, and developed a cure. Grandpa supported my experiment, and the tree survived. That apple tree still produces the best apples in the orchard, Baxter continued. Mr. Tobias always said, that's Margot's tree. We walked slowly through the orchard, and Baxter showed me the changes that had been made over the years. The new varieties of roses that Grandpa loved so much. The Japanese corner with bamboo and stones created from his designs. He talked about you often, especially in recent months, Baxter remarked as we stopped by a small pond with water lilies. Always with pride. My Margot creates gardens that heal the soul, was what he used to say. I miss him, I admitted, looking at the calm surface of the water. Sometimes I think he's still here, in this garden, among his trees. Baxter nodded understandingly. In a way he is. He has put a part of himself into every corner of this place. He hesitated a moment, then added, You know, he's been worried a lot lately about the future of the estate. Especially when your parents started visiting him a lot. I tensed. What do you mean? Baxter looked around as if to see if anyone was listening, and then spoke more softly. I don't like to gossip, Miss Margot, but your grandfather was a good man, and I don't want his memory sullied. He paused. Your mother and father. They've been coming almost every weekend for the last 6 months. That's never happened before. And after their visits, Mr. Tobias always seemed upset. One day I heard your mother talking on the phone in the gazebo. She was discussing with someone how to get control of his finances, and that the old man was becoming increasingly unmanageable. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rising inside. There's something else, Baxter continued. I keep tools in the garden shed. There's a closet with video cameras. Your grandfather installed a surveillance system after an attempted theft a few years ago. He told me the tapes should be kept, especially the ones of your parents. I thought he just wanted to preserve family moments. But now I realize he saw this coming. Can you show me those tapes? Sure, Baxter nodded. Come along. The garden shed smelled of earth and metal. Baxter opened an old metal cabinet, and inside it was modern surveillance equipment. Here, he pointed to a row of hard disks with dates on them. There's footage from the last 3 years. Mr. Tobias insisted on long-term storage. I took the disk with the last date on it. Can I see that? There's equipment in the house, Baxter nodded. In Mr. Tobias's study. Back in the house, I immediately checked the disk. There was footage from the cameras in the garden, the living room, the dining room, and my grandfather's study. I scrolled down to my parents' last visit before my grandfather's death, on September 15th. The footage showed my parents sitting in the living room with my grandfather. Mother was holding some papers. This is just a formality, Dad, she was saying. The trust will allow us to take care of your finances while you can enjoy your vacation. I'm quite capable of managing my own money, Vivian, Grandpa replied calmly. And I have Phineas. Phineas thinks only of his commissions, father interjected. We are a family. We will act in your best interests. How did you act in Margot's best interests? Grandfather's voice became sharper. By kicking her out of the house for choosing her own path? Mother visibly tensed. Margot made her choice. And you know we were right. This career of hers. What can it give her? A pittance compared to what she could have had if she had listened to us. She's happy, Grandfather replied simply. That's enough. Happiness doesn't pay the bills, Mother snorted. But let's not talk about Margot. Those papers need to be signed by the end of the week. Dr. Holland agrees that you need to worry less about business at your age. Grandfather looked at her in surprise. Dr. Holland? My doctor didn't say anything like that. Your new doctor, Dad quickly put in. We got you an appointment with the best geriatric specialist in Fort Worth. Grandpa rose slowly. I don't need a new doctor, and I don't need a trustee. I think we'd better end this conversation. Dad, the mother's voice became pleading. You just don't understand. I understand everything perfectly well, Vivian. Grandpa looked at her sadly. Unfortunately, I turned off the tape, feeling nauseous. They'd tried to declare him incompetent while he was still alive, found the right doctor, prepared the paperwork, and now they were using the same tactics to contest the will. These notes could be key evidence in a court of law. I had to show them to Crumpton. I gathered all the discs, and I drove to his office. On the way, I was overcome with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I was furious at my parents' actions. On the other, I was pained to realize how much money had distorted their humanity. Crumpton met me in a spacious office in a modern office building in downtown Fort Worth. With him was another man, tall, with an attentive gaze. Ms. Aldridge, I'd like you to meet Elliot Rayner, a specialist in contesting wills, Crumpton introduced him. He'll be representing our interests in court. Or rather, your interests, Ms. Aldridge, Reiner said, shaking my hand. And your grandfather's will. I have something important. I pulled out the discs. Surveillance footage from my grandfather's house. They prove that my parents tried to gain control of his finances while he was still alive. We went over a few key recordings. Rayner took notes, occasionally stopping the video and asking questions. Crumpton sat with an impenetrable expression, but I could see his shoulders tense. This is strong evidence, Rayner finally said, especially when combined with the medical reports of your grandfather's real doctor and the testimony of business associates. But I must warn you, Ms. Aldridge, this isn't going to be a pretty case. Your parents will probably use everything they can to smear you in the eyes of the court. I'm ready, I said firmly. I won't let them twist my grandfather's last will and testament. Good, Rayner nodded. Then let's move on to defense strategy. We spent the next hours discussing the legal aspects of the case. Reiner explained that the first hearing was scheduled in 3 weeks, and by that time we had to have all the evidence and testimony ready. We'll need people who can attest to your grandfather's mental clarity in the last months of his life, he said. Business associates, domestic staff, friends. The gardener, Baxter Noon, I said immediately. He worked with Grandpa every day, and Mrs. Bloomfield, the housekeeper. All right, Rayner wrote down the names. I'll talk to them. Who else? Dr. Samuel Bridges, Mr. Winslow's personal physician, Crumpton put in. He's been seeing Tobias for the past 20 years and has done regular checkups, including cognitive tests. By the end of the meeting, we had a clear plan of action. Rayner was to take statements from all potential witnesses. Crumpton was to prepare financial documentation proving that Grandpa had actively and prudently managed his assets until his last day. My job was to gather personal testimony, letters, emails, photographs, anything that could demonstrate Grandpa's clarity of mind. By the time I returned to the estate, it was already dark. I felt physically and emotionally exhausted, but I had no time to rest. I needed to start sorting through Grandpa's personal belongings in search of more evidence. In the study, I sat down at his desk and began methodically checking drawers and folders. In one of the compartments, I found a leather day planner. I opened it and saw my grandfather's neat handwriting. It was the diary he had kept for the past 3 years. I began to read the last entries. August 27, 2025. Vivian and Garrett came again today, insisted on seeing some new doctor. I refused. Vivian was upset, but it only confirmed my suspicions. They're up to something. Called Phineas. Discussed additional precautions. September 2nd, 2025. Video systems working well. Baxter's helping with archiving the recordings. He's a good man, loyal. Unlike Vivian, he never tried to take advantage of me. It's sad to realize that my own daughter has become so self-serving. Where did I go wrong in raising her? At least Margot grew up different. Strong, independent, honest. I hope she'll forgive me for dragging her into all this. But I have no choice. The estate must go to her, only she will keep its spirit alive. September 10th, 2025. Talked to Margot on the phone. She was talking about her new project in El Paso, landscaping a city park. Her voice is full of enthusiasm as she talks about her work. It's a real passion, not like Vivian with her meaningless social events. I'm proud of Margot. She reminds me of me when I was younger, when I wasn't building my business for money, but to create something worthwhile. September 15th, 2025. Vivian and Garrett were visiting again. Brought some trust documents. I refused to sign. They don't realize I see right through them. Or they do, but they underestimate my resolve. Either way, every precaution has been taken. Phineas knows what to do. The will is secure. Margot will get everything, and I know she'll handle the inheritance wisely. September 20th, 2025. I don't feel well today. My heart is racing. Dr. Bridges insists on hospitalization, but I refused. I want to be at home among my things, my memories. I called Margot, but I didn't tell her how I felt. I didn't want to alarm her. She was so happy to tell me about her sakura seedlings. Her voice gives me strength. I hope I'll see her again. That was the end of the record. Grandpa died 5 days after the last entry. I closed the diary, wiping away my tears. These pages not only proved his clarity of mind, but also revealed his soul, his true feelings and thoughts. There was a quiet knock at the door. It was Baxter. I'm sorry to intrude, Miss Margot. I've brought you some herbal tea. You haven't eaten anything all day. I accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you, Baxter. And thank you for the notes. They'll be very helpful. He nodded. Mr. Tobias was a wise man. He foresaw what might happen and prepared himself. Baxter was silent for a moment, then added, You know, on the last day, he asked me to plant new roses. He said, for Margot. She'll understand their significance. I planted them against the east wall. They're not blooming yet, but they'll be beautiful in the spring. What kind of roses are they? I asked. Will to Win is a rare variety. Mr. Tobias ordered them specially. They're the color of the rising sun with a golden hue. I smiled through my tears. Grandpa had always loved symbolism. These roses were his last message to me, a reminder that even after his death, the fight continues, and he believes in my victory. I'll wait for them to bloom, I said. In the meantime, we have a lot of work to do. There's a fight for grandfather's inheritance, and we'll need all the information we can get. Baxter nodded. I'll tell you everything I know, Miss Margot. Your grandfather deserves to have his last will and testament honored, and you deserve that inheritance. I clutched my grandfather's journal. With these notes, videos, and witnesses, we had a chance to win the case, and I was ready to fight not so much for money, but for Grandpa's memory and for principle. The parents shouldn't have sullied his name for the sake of their greed. The cold November wind fluttered my coat as I walked up the courthouse steps. The last session was due to start in 30 minutes, and every nerve in my body was tingling with tension. The past weeks had been a marathon of preparation, depositions, interrogations, and sleepless nights. Phineas Crumpton and Elliot Rayner were waiting for me at the entrance, both in smart suits and with impenetrable expressions on their faces. Ready, Ms. Aldridge? Crumpton asked as we exchanged greetings. As ready as I can be, I adjusted my scarf. Do you think there will be a decision today? I'm sure of it, Rayner nodded. Judge Lawrence doesn't like to delay trials. Besides, we've presented enough evidence to convince any reasonable person. We went up to the courtroom, where the participants in the trial were already assembled. At the opposite end of the room, I saw my parents with their attorney, a tall, thin man with a shark-like smile. The mother looked impeccable as always, in an understated navy blue suit and pearl earrings. Father sat beside her, straightening his back with a stony expression on his face. Our gazes met across the hall, and I felt a chill emanating from my mother. She'd never once tried to talk to me in person in those weeks. All communication had been through the lawyers. I was glad of that, though. Every word from them was a poison dart aimed straight at my heart. The bailiff announced the beginning of the session, and Judge Lawrence entered the room, a short, full man with attentive eyes and a neat gray beard. He quickly flipped through the documents in front of him and looked up at those present. Ladies and gentlemen, we are assembled to adjudicate the case of the contested will of Tobias Frederick Winslow. I have carefully reviewed all the evidence presented, heard the witnesses and experts, and read the written opinions. I am now ready to announce the court's decision. Time seemed to stand still. I felt Crumpton gently squeeze my hand under the table, a gesture of support that I appreciated more than he could have imagined. In the matter of the challenge to the will of Tobias Frederick Winslow, the judge began in his deep, measured voice, the court rules. The suit of Vivian Winslow Aldridge and Garrett Aldridge is dismissed. The will is declared valid in all its parts and provisions. I exhaled, only now realizing I'd been holding my breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's face contort into a grimace of anger as my father put his hand on her shoulder in an attempt to restrain her. The court finds that the plaintiffs have failed to present sufficient evidence of the testator's incapacity or undue influence, the judge continued. On the contrary, the materials submitted by the defendant conclusively demonstrate that Tobias Winslow was of sound mind and acted of his own free will. The court paid particular attention to the deceased's videotapes and diary entries, which clearly show his mental clarity and the reasonableness of the decisions he made. The judge paused, looked around the room, and continued. In addition, the court notes the plaintiff's attempts to gain control of Tobias Winslow's finances while he was still alive, which calls into question the bona fides of their present claims. Court costs shall be borne by the plaintiffs. The judgment may be appealed in due course within 30 days. The judge banged his gavel, and the session was adjourned. Reiner turned to me with a smile. Congratulations, Ms. Aldridge. This is a complete victory. Crumpton nodded. Your grandfather would be pleased. We were gathering our papers, preparing to leave the hall when I noticed my parents approaching us. My mother was walking ahead, with her head held high and her lips pressed into a thin line. Congratulations, Margot. Her voice oozed venom. You got what you wanted. I didn't want this lawsuit, Mom, I replied calmly. It was your idea. You took advantage of an elderly man's weakness, she hissed. Manipulated him, turned him against his own daughter. That's enough, Vivian, Crumpton intervened. The court has already spoken on the matter. Yes, and we know how it happened. The father stepped forward. What connections you used? I felt anger rising inside me, hot, all-consuming anger. Let's get out of here, I said, heading for the door. If you want to talk, let's do it out here. We stepped out onto the wide porch of the courthouse. The fall air was cool and fresh after the stuffy courtroom. I turned to my parents, who followed me. Tell me. My voice sounded surprisingly calm considering the storm inside. Do you really believe what you're saying? That I manipulated my grandfather? That he was incapacitated? We know what you were doing. My mother crossed her arms over her chest. All those secret meetings, phone calls, meetings and calls with the man who loved me unconditionally. I shook my head. With the only family member who supported me when you kicked me out of your life. We gave you a choice. Dad raised his voice. What choice? I grinned bitterly. To submit to your will or to be without a family. It's not a choice, it's an ultimatum. And you know what? I'm grateful I chose freedom. Because if you hadn't, I never would have known what you were capable of. The mother took a step forward, her eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I've seen the records, Mother. I read grandfather's journals. You tried to have him declared incompetent while he was alive so you could take his money. We were trying to protect him. She was outraged. He was becoming more and more eccentric, making questionable decisions. Like the decision to leave the inheritance to me instead of you? I shook my head. It's all about money, isn't it? It always has been and it always will be. To you, people are just a means to an end. Don't you dare talk to us like that, my father hissed. We're your parents. Yes, unfortunately, that's a fact I can't change. I took a deep breath. But I get to choose who I consider my real family, and it's not you. My mother's face turned pale. You're giving up on us? After all we've done for you? What have you done for me, Mom? I looked her straight in the eye. Controlled my every move? Criticized every choice? Denigrated every accomplishment? That's not love. That's toxicity. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I'm not giving up on you. I'm just acknowledging the reality that you'll never change, and I won't let you poison my life anymore. If you ever want a normal, healthy relationship, without manipulation, without control, without trying to remake me, let me know. Until then, I'm asking you to leave me alone. You'll regret it. My mother clenched her fists. You won't be able to cope with this condition. You'll squander everything your grandfather has built up. Maybe, I shrugged. But it would be my choice and my responsibility, not yours. I turned to leave, but my father grabbed my arm. This isn't over, Margot. We'll appeal. I gently released my hand. And you'll lose again. You have no proof, Papa. Only greed and resentment. With those words, I walked down the steps to the waiting car where Crumpton and Rayner were waiting for me. Without looking back, I could feel my breathing getting easier with each step, as if the heavy chains that had been binding me for years were finally loosening. Esther Bloomfield and Baxter Noon greeted me when we got back to the manor. Their faces lit up with joy when Crumpton announced our victory. Mr. Tobias would have been so happy, Esther sobbed, wiping her eyes with a lace handkerchief. This is truly your home now, Miss Margot. Baxter smiled. We gathered in the parlor where Crumpton opened a bottle of grandfather's favorite whiskey and toasted to the triumph of justice and the memory of Tobias Winslow. Later that evening, when everyone had dispersed, I stayed in grandfather's study, looking at his portrait above the fireplace. He looked at me with his penetrating eyes, and the shadow of a smile seemed to play across his lips. I miss you, Grandpa, I whispered, but I will try to be worthy of your trust. The next days were spent thinking about the future. I took long walks around the estate, exploring every corner, trying to feel its spirit and figure out what to do with it. On one such day, sitting on a bench next to a rosebush called Will to Win that was beginning to produce its first buds despite the late season, it hit me. I called Diane in El Paso. Diane, remember our project for Chamisel Park? I asked as soon as she answered. Of course I do, she replied. Eloise is still keeping it open for you, though she's grumbling about the delay. Tell her I'll be back in 2 weeks to finalize it. But I have something else in mind, something bigger. I told her about my idea, to turn part of the estate into an environmental education center where people could learn botany, gardening, sustainable urban greening techniques. That sounds amazing, Diana marveled. But what about your job in El Paso? I'm not quitting, I assured her. I'll combine it. Modern technology, remember? I can work on projects remotely, and I'll fly in for important meetings. After talking to Diane, I found Baxter in the garden. He was pruning the rose bushes, getting them ready for winter. Baxter, I began, I have an idea for the estate. I outlined my plan, and with each word the old gardener's eyes lit up brighter and brighter. Mr. Tobias would be delighted, he said when I had finished. He always said that gardens should not only be pleasing to the eye, but should also teach people. Would you help me with that? I asked. I know landscaping, but I have no experience in managing such a large estate. It would be my pleasure, Miss Margot, Baxter nodded. And I know who else can help. Mr. Tobias had a whole network of contacts in the environmental community. I can put you in touch with them. Over the next week, I immersed myself in planning. Crumpton helped with the legal aspects, Baxter with the practical. I called colleagues in El Paso, consulted with experts in educational programs. The estate gradually filled with new energy, new ideas. One evening, while looking through old photo albums in the library, I came across a picture I had never seen before. On it, my grandfather was sitting on the very bench where I liked to think, and next to him was little me, about 6 years old, with a magnifying glass in my hands, studying some flower. On the back of the photo in grandfather's handwriting was written, Margot discovers the mysteries of nature, future keeper of the garden. I clutched the photo to my chest, feeling my eyes fill with tears. Grandpa had always known who I was and what I wanted out of life, even when I hadn't realized it myself yet. The next morning, I officially announced my plans to the household staff. Esther Bloomfield shook her hands. An education center! How noisy and fun it will be here. I hope you'll stay, Esther, I said. This house won't be the same without you. My dear, she smiled. I'm not going anywhere. Mr. Tobias always said you would breathe new life into this place. In the evening, Crumpton brought me the news. My parents hadn't filed an appeal by the deadline. Apparently, they had finally accepted defeat. It's a final victory, he said. Now you can move forward without a backward glance. Thank you, Phineas, I smiled. For everything. Not just for the legal help, but for the support. Grandfather was right to trust you. Likewise, Ms. Aldridge, he nodded. Tobias was right about you. You are the right person to keep his legacy alive and growing. 2 weeks later, as promised, I returned to El Paso to complete the project for the park. Eloise Pym, my boss, listened to my story about my legacy and future plans. So you're a millionaire now, she hummed. And you still want to work for me? I want to do what I love, I answered. Money doesn't change anything. She smiled. That's why I've always appreciated you, Margot. You have your priorities straight. When Diane and I finished the project and turned in the drawings to the city, I invited my colleagues to dinner at a small Mexican restaurant, the same one where Grandpa and I had eaten on his last visit. To new beginnings, I raised my glass. And to the people who helped me get there. I looked around the table where Diana, Eloise, and 3 other colleagues from the studio were sitting. The people who'd supported me over the years, who'd valued me for my talent, not my background or money. My real family. You know, Diana said, when the others were engaged in conversation, you've changed over the months. You've become more confident. Have I? I smiled. I guess it's because I've finally dealt with the past, and now I could only look forward. That night, back in my El Paso apartment, which I had decided to keep despite my inheritance, I pulled out an old picture of my grandfather and set it on the dresser. His eyes seemed to look at me with approval. I knew there was more work to be done. Setting up the education center, combining my career in El Paso with my new responsibilities in Fort Worth, managing my inheritance, it all took effort, time, and energy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt absolutely certain of my path. I hadn't forgiven my parents and had no intention of doing so. Some things you can't forgive, you can only accept and move on. And that's what I set out to do. Accept my past with all its pain and toxicity, and create a new future where there is no room for manipulation and control, only freedom, creativity, and genuine caring. The will to win roses my grandfather planted for me were going to bloom by spring. And I knew for sure I would be there to see their first bloom, bright, bold, full of life, as a symbol of my new beginning.